fantastic to be here. My name is Andre. As you know, I'm a developer advocate at CoreLogics. I've been an SRE for nearly a decade. I have touched almost every architecture or industry in terms of architecture across the globe. And my talk today is about observability is too expensive. So I want to start with a story. Picture this. One of the world's largest hedge funds, billions of dollars under management, and it's around the morning and the quant trading applications went down. So this is a hedge fund with billions of dollars under management. Our tradings went down. I'm on a call with all of the hedge fund executives, the team leads, and nobody has a clue what is going on. Nobody has a clue. The irony is this mission critical system, billions of dollars under management, handling billions of dollars of transactions, they don't know what's happened. They're monitoring Windows Server 2008 and FTP file transfers, username and password in plain text. So they had a Ferrari of observability tools, but they were paying to monitor horse and cart. So this is where observability gets interesting, because all this money and the system still went down and they were still blind. Why? Because they were paying to observe everything but understand nothing. So the real kicker was when I seen what they were spending. There was higher costs this high cost they're spending to observe the system. It was even higher, it would have been a lot less just to migrate and upgrade their systems. So this story captures what I see a lot of business doing. They're very hesitant when they hear about observability. They think the costs are too high and it takes too long to migrate their system or to get it set up. And what I learned that day was it's not that observability is too expensive, it's that we're doing it wrong. So that's what I want to talk about today. How we can make observability work for us without breaking the bank. So let's start with some statistics on data, specifically data growth. In 2010, we produced 2 zettabytes of data globally. In 2023, 120 zettabytes we produced. We're projected to do nearly 200 in 2025. Let that sink in. That's 90% of the world's data was generated in the last 2 years. That's a 74x increase in 13 years. Just to put that into some sort of perspective, a single modern microservice application can generate more observability data in one day than an entire monolithic application would have done in 2010 over a month. So what does this mean for observability? It means that there's more services generating data. It means there's more complex architecture to monitor, and there's more interconnected systems to observe, and higher costs to store and process it all. And here's where we hit our first problem. We're trying to monitor everything, store everything, index everything. But as we're about to discover, this approach isn't just expensive, it's unnecessary. So what are the challenges in observability costs today? Let's break this down. And as someone who's been in the trenches, this is very real. We have our microservices. Remember when errors used to be in one place? Those days are over. I like to call this like a silent disco now, where services are failing quietly and nobody knows where it's going wrong. And then we have our cloud infrastructure. So for example, take your German car manual, the AWS service catalog makes that look like a kid's book. We've got more moving parts. We've got VPNs, load balancers, CDNs, all generating logs, metrics, and traces. So for example, I've seen a couple of apps fail before, and we're seeing errors in the logs. The logs don't show anything in relation to the error. It turns out it's the VPN, it's the load balancer that's producing the error, and we weren't observing that. So that's hours wasted just for not having our observability set up correctly. So speaking of breaking things, there's now chaos engineering, where we're intentionally breaking things and explaining to our CFO that we're watching to break these things as well. So we have ephemeral infrastructure as well, which is infrastructure that lasts longer than a German train delay, and containers and serverless functions that are popping in and out of existence before we even get the chance to observe them. So looking at these challenges, you might think we just need less data. We just need to ingest less data. I used to think the same thing. There's many a time where I've went in and I've just removed a lot of data thinking, oh, I'll save us some money here. But then we're missing out on those key metrics. You might be saving money, but you're losing those key statistics. So at CoreLogics, we thought the same thing. It was the industry standard where everybody sent everything to a database. We indexed it all, having it ready for instant search. That's how everybody did it. But we're asking the wrong question. It's not about having less data, it's about having smarter data management, next generation approaches for next generation challenges. So I'm going to share some eye-opening statistics, research across thousands of our customers, and these might make your CFO cry. So would you believe me that if I told you that 99% of index observability data is never searched at all? Let me say that again, 99% of data that we're indexing, we're storing in databases, high performance storage, that we're keeping readily available for instant search, is never actually searched. So that's the thing about indexing. It's expensive in terms of storage, it's CPU intensive, it's memory intensive, it requires content maintenance and optimization. We're basically paying for a full gym membership when all we need is a pair of running shoes. But it gets better. We're not just not searching this data. 95% of callouts are from the same 5 errors. Yet we're defining hundreds, sometimes thousands of alerts. Take that hedge fund, when we had that major outage, there was thousands of alerts. People were scrambling everywhere, and no one can actually see what really mattered. So we're paying to store these alert queries for every possible use case. Some of them might never trigger, and that's very wasteful. But wait until you hear the percentage of observability data is never used at all. 30% of data is never used at all, ever. So we're storing, we're storing all of this data. 30% of it is never used. I remember doing an audit for cloud spend, helping them. One of those typical is, let's reduce your bill. And they were paying to observe servers in a development environment that never existed anymore. It wasn't even there anymore. Paying premium rates for servers that weren't there. So that's just not a technical oversight. A lot of that team left during the Great Resignation. So if you think about that, and post-COVID, there's been a massive turnover in the amount of people leaving companies. So, for example, a new team's coming in and they're seeing all this data move. They don't know what's going on. They're afraid to ask questions. There's no one taking responsibility. There's no documentation. There's no sense of responsibility in terms of turning something off. And those that know why these things have been set up have left. And meanwhile, the costs keep accumulating. So the new team, as this new team are firefighting these issues, they're not auditing their observability spend and their configuration. So this is why we need smarter observability that helps us understand what we're monitoring and why. But here's the good news. This isn't just a problem, it's an opportunity. An opportunity to rethink how we handle observability data. So show of hands if anyone's seen this kind of pattern before. If you've worked in observability, this will be familiar. No one? Anybody? Yes, okay, great. So this is a traditional approach. You ingest everything, and you put it into high performance storage, keep it for a couple of weeks, and then put it into an object or archive it. The issue with this pipeline isn't that it isn't use case driven. It isn't use case driven. The core assumption with this is that the value of data is intrinsically linked to its age. This is true, but it's not the primary definition of value. Some data is extremely valuable for longer, but most data is not valuable at all. So we have to think differently. Instead of treating data the same, we need to make some intelligent use case decisions. So this is a use case driven pipeline. So take our payment processing logs. That's what I would say would be urgent. You need to know about that instantly, so you put that into your high performance. Dev environment metrics, not so much. You would put that into your object. So the benefits of this is S3 is incredibly cheap. It's less than $1 per gigabyte. Your high performance could be 10 times more than that. Performance benefits as well is you're keeping what you actually need in high performance, and that will speed things up dramatically. And scalability, this will grow as your company grows. It'll scale with you beautifully. There's less worry about those high performance storage costs. So in fact, we're seeing a lot more customers putting their production logs into and metrics into S3 because the performance keeps getting better and better. But the key thing here is the decision logic at ingestion. We're taking those critical production logs, high performance, yes, then debug logs that are not so important, straight to object. All this is done at an ingestion level. So it's not just about saving money, it's being smart with your data and understanding your data. It's like being a policeman and you're directing your traffic. Now here's where things gets really interesting and expensive. So if you get a SaaS provider, they typically ask you to install their proprietary agent. and send everything in their proprietary formats. That's like getting married on the first date. And the prenup's really expensive. So picture this. This is a thing of vendor lock-in. The more data you send, the harder it becomes to migrate away. As you scale, your data should scale with you. So as you see here in this diagram, this is the SaaS observability provider. That will get bigger and bigger over time. And that comes with hidden cost. Every integration you build, every custom dashboard, every custom metric, and alerts, these will become technical debt if you ever want to change providers. So the key thing here is to abstract away from your vendor. Think of they should be replaceable. So think of them as a replaceable vendor and not a permanent part of your infrastructure. The solution for this is to adopt open telemetry. This will help you break free from vendor lock-in and puts the power back in your hands. It'll give you that negotiation advantage when it comes to renewal. I've seen companies try and change their observability provider, but because of those proprietary agents and the proprietary formats, that could take up to 6 months and they just don't have the time, no resources. That's vendor lock-in in action. But with OTel, that same migration could be done in a few lines of configuration. And a good, well-architected OTel configuration, as I mentioned earlier, will give you that smart observability. You really understand what's going on. You'll have better characteristics of your system. So the beauty of this is threefold. You're maintaining control of your data. You can easily switch between providers if necessary. And you're using an open standard, which is becoming the industry norm. Now here's the thing with observability pricing. Vendors will show you their ingestions costs, their price per gigabyte, and it looks competitive. But that's like buying a car without considering the insurance, the cost to run it, the maintenance. And this is the first lesson of observability pricing. The sticker price it's just the beginning of the story, sorry. So let's peel back the layers. Two vendors, 50 cents per gigabyte, looks the same. But what's actually happening here is there's a cost per user. So if you have new users join your team, that's an additional cost. A growing team, you'll have growing bills. You have CPU costs, so if you've had any large queries, complex dashboards, that'll be extra. If you're doing machine learning, you better take out a mortgage. So this base ingestion is the advertised price, but it's rarely your final cost. So I've seen companies thinking they've got a good deal at say 50 cents, but say after all the extras and them hidden costs, it can go up to 5 times more than the advertised amount. And that's the knockout punch, overages. It's a term that's been made up by these observability firms, and it's a silent killer of observability budgets. A fellow dev advocate of mine watches his firm spend nearly 4 times their observability budget in overages. The really painful part is that those vendors charge premium rates on those overages costs. So it can be 3 times as high as their base. And you don't know about it until you get your bill. So let me tell you another thing that catches people out. I'm so glad I got this into my slide as well. So feature pricing. It's particularly sneaky because it plays into our natural curiosity as engineers. So picture this, you're in your observability platform, you see this shiny new feature, let's say database monitoring or continuous profiling. You click enable, and you play around with it for an hour, and as most engineers, we forget about it. A couple of months later, your CFO is at your desk, and your bill is increased by 20K. Why? Because you turned that feature on for an hour, and you forgot about it, and you're charged per month, per host, regardless of whether you're actually using it. So let me share some real numbers I've seen. This is taken from a blog that I published on the CoreLogics website. We have database monitoring there at $70 per host, continuous profile at 19, APM at 31. So if you multiply that by, say, like 400 hosts, that can really get out of control of what you're already paying. I've heard some horror stories from account managers from previous companies. They know of companies turning on APM to like diagnose a microservice failure. And just because they put on that for that one service, they ended up paying it across 400 hosts. So that one debug session the cost could really, really silly. So the worst part of this, the vendors don't even notify. There's no pop-up of like, do you want to enable this feature? It's going to cost you X amount. It can add some real surprises to your bill. Another thing I want to talk about is the hidden cost of fear. So imagine this, picture this, a new engineer joins the team, let's call him Bill. He's eager, he's talented, he wants to make an impression. But then he hears the horror stories. Sir enabled this feature last year and it cost us 50K. John tried enabling continuous profiling and that triggered another massive bill. He's been told this, don't touch the observability platform. just don't touch it. They become then afraid. They're afraid to investigate production issues, create new dashboards, or try new monitoring approaches. I remember being an engineer, like touching the observability platform was a non-starter. And this became a problem because the buck stopped with one guy, and he ended up becoming the single point of failure. And the irony is here, we're paying to make our systems more reliable, but when the pricing is this unpredictable, it's really hard when the price is this unpredictable, it's hard because we should be monitoring these systems, but if we're fearful, we're not gonna get those good insights. So we should be instilling confidence in our engineers and making them provide their best work. It's so crucial that engineers should be empowered, not paralyzed by their fear of cost. So let me leave you with some critical pieces of advice for managing your observability costs. You should be asking the right questions. If a vendor approaches you or a sales approaches you from a SaaS observability provider, ask them what tools they have built specifically for cost optimization. Not documentation, not guidelines, actual tools. Their reaction will tell you everything you need to know about their commitment to your budget. Watch out for those hidden costs. Remember those overages I mentioned. It's just like reading the small print, sorry. And finally, let me come full circle to the story that I started with. Remember that hedge fund, those traders that couldn't trade in the morning data? That company was spending millions on observability, but they couldn't prevent a simple certificate expiration because they were doing observability wrong. Truth is about observability, it doesn't have to be expensive, it has to be smart. You don't need to index everything. You don't need to store everything in high performance storage. You don't need to be locked into a vendor's ecosystem. And you definitely don't need to be running on Windows Server 2008. What you need is a use case driven approach to your data, open standards like OpenTelemetry, and tools built for cost optimization. So next time someone tells you about observability is too expensive, remember this talk, remember this hedge fund, and remember observability doesn't always have to be expensive. Sometimes the most expensive are just the most expensive, okay? Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, thank you very much, Andre. That was a very insightful talk. So just last talk, we will have the catchbox back, ready for you to ask away your questions about observability and cost optimization. Any questions? Now's the chance. Yes. Anybody? No questions at all. Okay, I guess. Oh, one question. Perfect.
Hello. In your experience, the different observability SaaS vendors, for example, how many of them are, let's do it this way, how good would you grade these vendors about their efforts to help you in the cost management sector? Is there much headroom there?
In terms of help? No, yeah. as soon as they've made the sale, they don't care. And there's a lot of horror stories come back from companies, from people that they're locked in, and they've sent over their data. The prices just keep getting higher and higher. And, yeah, as soon as it's signed the deal, they don't really mind.
Because I guess it would be a selling point for these vendors if they say, hey guys, we know observability can be too expensive if unchecked. We help you to get this done, and maybe they have even a benefit over their competitors, right? But I get the idea from your talk. They aren't quite there yet.
Not quite there yet, but it's more what I said about the next generation of observability, where if you process your data in stream and don't just store it into a database straight away, you can make significant cost savings with that AWS S3 storage. And it's becoming much faster and quicker. You're getting the same performance benefit. Well, not the same, but it's getting there. But it's a lot less cost, but you're still getting the same great feature set.
All right, thanks.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. You showed very interesting numbers about never used metrics, never used data.
Yeah, about the amount of customers that actually are not using this stuff, yes.
Yeah, and I would like to ask about tools, how you define which data never used, which metrics never
You would do that with parsing rules, but there's also, we have for any SaaS vendor you take on, they would sit down with you and go through your logs and what you're sending and what is really needed and what's not. Like, for example, your status codes for HTTP requests, you want your 400s, your 501s, etc. They would go into a certain bucket, and the other ones then would go into your object, for example. So you would define those rules. So always setting rules on your data, and then you can define where you want it to go.
There's another question in the back.
It seems that the cost is coming from a SaaS, having a SaaS environment. How about on-premise here, or is that not something that's done?
Well, when you're sending data to a SaaS provider, you're sending it into typically their database, and that's where that high cost is. But if you own your own data, so if you're processing it in-stream and doing it yourself, that's where you get them significant cost benefits. And yes, you can do it on-prem as well.
Okay, if there are no more questions left to be answered, then let's thank Andre again for his talk.